All right, welcome everyone. My name is Mike Zastapol. I'm the Farm and Sea to Campus Coordinator for Farm to Institution New England, and I'm so glad you're joining us today for this Farm and Sea to Campus Forum put on by Farm to Institution New England in collaboration with the Henry P. Kendall Foundation. The Farm and Sea to Campus Forum is our new monthly webinar series that serves as an opportunity for anyone to connect, share, and learn about campus issues in New England. Each forum will feature a combination of guest speakers and a Q&A discussion. Today's topic is communication strategies for engaging students in local food initiatives on campus. All right. Having trouble getting to the next slide. 1 second. Oh, yeah. One moment. We're almost there. Apologies. All right. Still with us. So apologies, everyone. So the plan for today is we'll have a panel of 4 guest speakers, followed by about 20 minutes of Q&A moderated by our partner, Holly Fowler. We have an excellent panel of 4 speakers today who will share their experiences with a variety of engagement strategies and the trade-offs of implementing each of them. We hope that all of you joining us today will learn a few new ideas for engaging students and communicating the value of local food on your campus. So a little more about us. We are Farm to Institution New England is a backbone organization for a 6-state network of nonprofit, public, and private entities working to mobilize the power of regional institutions to transform our food system. We work to increase the amount of good local food served in our region's schools, hospitals, colleges, and other institutions. For more information about FINE, please explore our website at www.farmtoinstitution.org. One of the sectors that we focus on is the campus sector, which includes colleges, universities, and prep schools. And one of the ways we support this sector is through the Farm and Sea to Campus network. The network is a community of higher education and food system stakeholders from New England who connect, share, and collaborate to develop transparent regional supply chains and educate campus communities about regional food systems. So as we get started today, I'd like to introduce you to our webinar platform, Zoom, and one of the interactive features that we'll be using today. If you look toward the bottom of your screen, you will see that there is a toolbar and a little chat box. Throughout the webinar, we invite you to use the chat box to share any of your questions, comments, and other information with everyone else who's attending the webinar today. You will see that you can chat with our panelists or with everyone attending today. So please feel free to chat while they're speaking, and once they're done, Holly will actually be taking your questions from the chat box to use for the Q&A session. And with that, I would like to introduce our moderator, Holly Fowler. Holly is the CEO and co-founder of Northbound Ventures and working as a collaborator with the Henry P. Kendall Foundation. Welcome, Holly.
Thanks, Mike. And to build on this piece of technology that Mike just shared with us, the chat board, I'm about to introduce some of our speakers, but I'd love for those of you who are attending to utilize that chat board to tell us a little bit about yourselves. So just your name and maybe the institution or organization that you're representing today. And I know that many of you answered the question when you registered for the webinar of a student engagement strategy that's been working well for you on campus around local and regional food. And I'll share a few of the things that you chimed in with, but it would be great as you also introduce yourselves on the chat board to share like just a snippet, a few words about also the student engagement piece that's been working well for you. I saw as folks registered that point of sale marketing, using monitors in the dining hall, free open houses and taste testings, peer-to-peer education. All of those have been working. Some of you have on-campus farms where students participate, or farmers market, or offer internships. And some of you have branded programs or events. I saw something called the Plate of the Union, in the registration list, which I thought was kind of cleverly branded. And certainly loads of culinary demos with folks who are your local and regional producers, as well as trainings for students. So it would be great as you introduce yourselves to share a little bit. And certainly, as Mike said, as we go through, as you have questions, type them in. If you have a comment, a reflection, an insight, a resource to offer to others on the line, please take that opportunity to type it in. And we'll be able to share that information out afterwards. So our panelists today, Caitlin, do I have control? Can we advance to the next slide? Great, thank you. So we have 4 amazing speakers. To kick us off is Erin Witham, who's the Assistant Director for Sustainable Programs and Facilities Management at the University of Southern Maine. Erin will then pass to Megan Kennedy, who's a student at Unity College. Third up for us today is Jenny Porter, who's the Community Food Security Coordinator for NOFA Vermont. And then finally, Abby Duker, who's the Food Literacy Project Fellow at Harvard University. And each one of them have prepared a few slides with a bit more information about both the programs that they're engaged with at their respective institutions, as well as the programming that's been working well for them around student engagement. So I'm sure that they are as equally psyched to hear what you are doing where you are as they are to share what they've been up to where they are. And with that, I'm just going to leave it to them. And Erin, I think you're up first.
Great, thank you. Just going to gain control of the mouse here. All right, so I direct the Office of Sustainability at the University of Southern Maine. And in that capacity, I serve on the University of Maine Systems Dining Governance Committee that oversees our contract with our dining services provider, Sodexo. And I've been in the field of campus sustainability for about 10 years. On campus, we have a lot of engagement strategies that I would qualify as immersive engagement strategies. And one of them is working with our student EcoReps program, which has 5 dedicated spots to sustainable food. And those students work on community engagement and sustainable food by posting on social media, by creating videos, and by running an on-campus community garden in an on-campus greenhouse. The community garden is comprised of 36 plots for student, staff, and faculty. They buy the plots for a reduced rate and basically run those plots for the entire growing season. The greenhouse is something that produces food right on campus for our dining hall, and that's located next to one of our largest dining halls on campus. We also have strategies that are focused on visual marketing. This is more of a passive type of engagement. 2 that have taken a lot of time to develop, but that we're most proud of, include different versions of a local food map. So the one on the left that you see on your screen is more or less the first generation of this. And this was made in ArcGIS with a faculty member's support in one of his students. And this just shows where our food is coming from to the customers entering the dining hall. And it's printed out on a big poster board, and it's visible for those folks walking in. The version on the right is the next generation of this. It has some of the same data, but it also has that additional food percentage, the current local food that's being purchased in the dining hall and the percentage of that. And that's updated at least quarterly, sometimes more often. And our dining services provider, Sodexo, has also created napkin holders that have basically the same information that you see in the poster on the right. So they're displaying the local food percentage that's updated frequently. And Sodexo has also installed meal signs underneath various entrees in the cafeteria to show where the food is coming from if it's a local source. We've had mixed results with these different strategies. I would say the most successful have been the deep engagement with the community garden, because it's hard not to feel engaged if your hands are in the dirt every day. So that's been great for the people who are involved. But again, it's only 36 people who are intimately involved with that. The local food maps have gotten a really positive response. And according to an informal survey done by Sodexo for people eating in the dining hall, more than 30% of the patrons knew what the current local percentage was of food that we were buying. So that shows, I think, that that's pretty successful. And then the napkin holders have helped with that effort as well. Less successful have been the signs that appear underneath the entrees that are being served. For some reason, those just don't garner as much attention or lead to as many questions about the food. And then the greenhouse, surprisingly enough, has not gotten a huge reception on campus. It's not terribly visible, even though it's right next to the dining hall. The purpose of it isn't visible to students. They don't quite comprehend that that food is being served in the dining hall, even though we have meal signs showing that it is. So we're actually going to do away with that project and focus on maybe building another community garden. So looking into the future, I think what we need more of at the University of Southern Maine are specific questions in our annual dining surveys that really get at what student, staff, and faculty want to see for local food, what types they want to see, what would really motivate them and inspire them to want to eat more local food. I'd like to see specific questions geared toward that. And that dovetails nicely with a nice community-based social marketing strategy that we'd like to employ on campus. And I speak about that strategy in terms of a very specific methodology as defined by Doug Mackenzie Moore in the book he published several years ago. And there's a whole 5-step process to going about a good community-based social marketing strategy. I'd be happy to talk about that in the Q&A. So I'm going to pass it now to Megan Kennedy from Unity College.
Hi. So I'm Megan and a student at Unity College. I am a sustainability ambassador for the Sustainability Office. As part of my work there, I carry out projects for the office that increase our diversion rate or decrease our energy consumption. And I also promote sustainability at different campus events, just kind of raising awareness so that students are more aware. And can we go next? So some of our strategies that we used, our first big one was partnering with the Real Food Challenge. They're an organization that helps categorize and track your data for dining purchases. So there's 4 different categories that your food can fall under, which is local, ecologically sound, fair, and humane. And we research each individual brand to determine if they fall under those categories. And then at the end of the semester or year, depending on which type of survey you're doing, it'll break down your real food percentage and show you just how much of food was local. So it's really awesome for helping keep dining held accountable and make sure everybody's staying on track. We then use that information to produce our local tags. We tag food items that are locally sourced with their food item name and then what town they came from. We try to stay within a 250 mile for our definition of local. And next. Our second set of strategies is themed food days. We've had quite a bit of success with these. One of our big ones was Camp Wyman. They served local hot dogs and burgers and locally made granola in our trail mixes at our main dining hall. And they sent out the flyers on the right side to everybody and encouraged people to wear their red flannels and whatnot to help promote the camp theme. They also decorated the interior of the dining hall just to draw in as many people as they could. And then we also do local catch of the day, which we try to do on a weekly basis. And it features fish caught from the Gulf of Maine. And so basically they'll order it at the beginning of the week and we don't actually know what fish we'll be receiving. until Wednesday when it arrives. And so that helps, since we're not buying a specific fish, it helps keep the harvest levels at a sustainable rate. Plus, we're getting it at a discounted price because local food can be pretty pricey. And then they'll serve it on Thursday, and it'll be the main meal for that day. And next. So our response has been pretty good. We've increased our local food streams to 38%, which was awesome for us. Camp Wyman in particular had about a 58% participation rate. And we have similar results for the local catch of the day. The local tags haven't been working as much as we would like, but it's very low effort. So we're going to continue with that because it can't really harm at this point. Our biggest setback, however, is the cost of our meal plans because we try to keep them at a reduced rate. However, we're finding that trying to balance sustainable options with our meal plan costs has been a challenge. And next. So for our future communication, we're going to continue conducting surveys and focus groups. We try to have a survey once a semester or once a year, and then try to do a focus group once a year because you can get more detailed data that our surveys might not focus on. And then we also want to use student-led projects to increase engagement and participation on campus. We have 2 classes that are required by everybody that involve environmental issues. And within those classes, they have projects. And so we're going to try to use those projects to increase our local food streams. And I'll pass it off to Jenny.
Thanks, Megan. So that was a great segue. Megan mentioned surveys and focus groups, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So can you switch the slide or advance the slide? Thanks. So I work for NOFA Vermont as a community food security coordinator, where I coordinate programs that make local food accessible to low-income households. But what I'm going to be talking about today relates to some past work of mine. When I was a graduate student at the University of Vermont, I was a food systems graduate fellow, and I worked to support the Real Food Working Group on campus, which was kind of the multi-stakeholder group that instituted the Real Food Challenge at UVM. And during my time there, I conducted qualitative and quantitative research on campus about the Real Food Challenge and students' perceptions of the program, as well as food-related values. And so really the strategies that I'm going to talk about are about collecting information from students. And so the first one is surveying. So I partnered with a undergraduate social research methods class to conduct a survey on campus. And we got 900 responses of students, which is a lot, and I don't think I ever could have done that by myself. It was kind of a semester-long partnership with the class where I went in and explained the kind of information we needed, and then the class kind of ran with the project from the development of the survey questions to the actual conducting of the survey to then analyzing the data. So it was a semester-long time commitment on my behalf, but it was, pretty much free and no monetary cost on my behalf, which was great. It was kind of a win-win situation in that the students got to learn how to use these research methods and learn about the topic they were conducting the survey on, and I got 900 surveys that I never would have been able to get alone. And so I think that was a pretty successful way of getting kind of a broad range of data that we asked questions about students' awareness of the Real Food Challenge, as well as different factors that have motivated their food purchasing behaviors. And the second strategy we used to collect information from students on campus were focus groups. And I conducted 6 focus groups on campus with undergraduate students throughout the course of 1 semester. And this was much more of a time commitment on my behalf, a lot of upfront planning and scheduling, and then afterwards a lot of typing up my notes and analyzing that data. So it was a time commitment, but still relatively low cost, and only had to provide snacks for the focus groups, which was enough to draw undergraduate students to them. I think this was also relatively successful, and we got a lot deeper data that complemented the survey data. For example, we found that a certain percentage of students were aware of the Real Food Challenge in the survey, but then in the focus groups, we could kind of talk about what exactly they understood about the program. So a lot richer data. The drawbacks of the focus groups, I think we had a little bit of self-selection bias in that students that were already interested in topics related to food kind of self-selected to be in the focus group. So they seem to be a little bit more well-informed than the average students, perhaps. We tried to mitigate that by drawing students from every different kind of major area on campus or college. But still within that, you had your foodies from all the different areas, self-selecting. So these 2 strategies were great complements to each other. Like I said, for getting the broad data from a large sample of campus, and then getting deep data from a smaller sample. And in the future, I think surveys are a great way to benchmark your success. And so future follow-up surveys to the one I did have been conducted in order to measure, if awareness has increased or decreased based on certain marketing campaigns. It's also a great way to gauge if student opinion is shifting over time. And so I think conducting surveys every year or every 2 years is a great idea. And one of the main findings we found in all of this research was that, students' values around the origin of food and price of food are the largest determining factors of whether or not they value the Real Food Challenge, or whether or not they're willing to pay a premium for local food. And so our question kind of became, well, how do you influence students' values? So that's kind of a research area that we were interested in to follow up with, of like, what are the techniques to influence students' values and change them? And I think one thing to take away from my experiences here were that graduate students are a great resource to gather information on campus for you. But also the undergraduate student class was really valuable. And I think even if, I know a lot of folks listening in today are from nonprofit. You don't have to be affiliated with the university necessarily to partner with a class to do something like I did with the survey. Classes at UVM have partnered with community partners to do similar projects. So I think that's one outlet to think about if you're trying to learn about students' thoughts or opinions. And I'm gonna now pass it off to Abby.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Abby Duker, and I am the Food Justice Fellow for the Harvard Food Literacy Project. Sorry, also, my voice is a little bit gone. I've been a little bit sick lately, so bear with me. This is me, and as I said, I'm the Food Justice Fellow for the Food Literacy Project, which is basically a sort of subsidiary student-led organization, student-led part of the dining services, which focuses on creating programming that advances food literacy on campus and in the community. And my job specifically is to plan events and educate students about food justice and equity issues. I will talk a little more about that in a second. And I'm also a student. But basically the way that the Food Literacy Project works is we have 12 undergraduate House Fellows. And so that's each, like, I don't know how much you know about the structure of Harvard, but there are 12 dorms that are sort of the way that social life works on campus. 98% of students live on campus in one of these homes. So in each of these houses, we have a fellow that works in the house, works with the dining hall manager in that house. There's also a dining hall in each one of the dorms, and creates programming in house specific so that community can be fostered around food education in the sort of existing infrastructure of the dorm and in the existing infrastructure of the dining hall. Then there are 2 graduate student fellows, one at the School for Public Health and then one at large. And then there are 3 sort of special fellows. One is the Events and Outreach Fellow, who sort of works largely on publicizing, coordinating, and putting events together for Food Literacy Project at large. Then there's one Food Recovery Fellow who works and spearheads our food recovery program, where we repackage meals from the dining hall and donate them to Food for Free. And then the last is the Food Justice Fellow, that's me. And basically my position was created last year when responses to Food Literacy Project's expansion and sort of growing emphasis on sustainability said, hey, wait, there's an emphasis on sort of environmental sustainability, but not so much on the person-centered part of sustainability and, you know, the human costs and the labor costs and all of that. So my job is to create programming like we all do, but that specifically focuses on food justice. Next. And so what that really translates to largely is event planning. All of the house fellows and all of the sort of regular fellows just plan different events either for their house or for the university more broadly that anybody can sign up for. They can be field trips, lectures, volunteer days. We had a butcher demo at Saviner's Butcher Shop, cooking classes, all sorts of things like that. And we publicize the events via student email lists. People at Harvard and probably many other schools sort of live on their emails. And people will pub to house lists at large so that most people will see things, but also there's like the Harvard Community Garden or the Environmental Action Committee, or sort of affiliate groups that we often will publicize more heavily too, because there's sort of an overlap of interest there. We'll also flyer around campus, and then we put out our Self and Eater's Digest newsletter, which has information about food at Harvard and generally sort of updates and also publicizes all of our events. And that is also run by one of our fellows. And the House fellows sort of in their process of putting on events, as I said earlier, work with infrastructure in the house. And aside from the dining hall managers, what also happens is that the Office of Sustainability has house representatives in each house that advance sustainability in the house. And so often Food Literacy Project fellows and sustainability fellows kind of work together to put on events house-wide. Next. And these are images from 2 events that I put on in the last year. The image from the left was a service day with the Boston Area Gleaners, which, if you're unfamiliar, is an organization that collects surplus crops from farmers' fields and then redistributes those crops based on need. So they'll donate to places like Food for Free, they'll bring them to shelters, food pantries, etc. But their goal is just generally advancing food access and food security for individuals who might not have access or money or whatever that may be. And so that day we spent a few hours out on the fields farming and gleaning fresh local crops and then packaged them. And then their outreach coordinator talked to us about the work that the gleaners do, sort of the benefits and the difficulties that they face, and just what it's sort of like to work in the food justice realm from that perspective, going to farms after the crops have been harvested and just what they face. And students really enjoyed this event. It was like a great opportunity to get outside, provide an important locally based service, learn about an organization that has a bunch of volunteer opportunities. Everybody went home with big bags of extra carrots because we don't generally glean things that have little holes or whatever in them, but most things are sort of fine to eat, but we don't want to sort of donate things that don't look like they're high quality crops. And then we sort of shared recipes of what to do with all of our carrots, and many students who went on the trip then joined the volunteer list for the Boston Area Gleaners so that they could sort of stay involved in that. So that was really cool. Another one that I did this past semester was I invited 2 farm worker activists, Zuli Palacios and Kike Balcazar, who sort of are part of the farm worker-led organization Migrant Justice. And they spoke about generally what Migrant Justice does, but also what they spoke about was their successful Milk with Dignity campaign that happened last year, in which they were able to get Ben & Jerry's to sign a contract to sort of only source dairy from farms where sustainability practices that led to sort of fair housing, fair hours, fair wages, and all of that, where those sort of where that infrastructure was in place, and to push more farms in Vermont to create sustainable infrastructure for their farm workers. And so that was them talking about that. They were able to speak in Spanish, and we also had a translator translate to English so that we could they were able to sort of be comfortable and speak in their language, but also share their thoughts. So that was very exciting. And they also spoke about as they're both undocumented, and they talked about what it's like to be undocumented and to work as a farm worker and also as an activist. They were targeted during the campaign by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, so they talked about those experiences. So it was sort of a very deep and powerful event with a lens related to food, but not just about food and eating, about, what do people in all sort of parts of the food supply chain and of the food industry experience. So that was really cool. And those are just two examples, but we've done many others. Next slide. And for future communication, I separated into two groups what our sort of biggest things looking forward are. So the first is looking inward, create more transparency around where Harvard gets its food and determine areas for improvement, mobilize students to be advocates for more local food and for food practices that they believe are sustainable and agree with. And this is, in general, a practice every school obviously should implement, but specifically at Harvard, because as I said, 98% of students live on campus, and all students who live on campus are required to be on a full unlimited meal plan. There's not actually that much transparency about where food comes from. We have a big infrastructure around food education at large, but not so much about local food. And a lot of students don't know, for example, that we get all of our chicken from Tyson. And I think if students knew that, there would be more just pushback against wholesalers versus local food. But there's not that much awareness of it, and students actually don't have much of a choice. I mean, they can buy food on their own if they'd like, but they're all still paying for a meal plan. So that was one big direction that I'd like to move in the future. And then in terms of strengthening partnerships, what that would look like is specifically for my position, because it is new and doesn't have infrastructure, but also because it's not affiliated with a dorm or affiliated with the School of Public Health or something. It's basically it's up to me to decide, what is an interesting, cool food justice related event that we can put on? Do we have the funds for it? Do we have this and that? And that has been a lot of inviting people to talk, but less again, mobilizing students and less educating students about things like the Farm Bill and working with more. So what I'd like to do is to work with more outside organizations that are advancing food justice, things like Fresh Truck, which provides health care and fresh produce to people in areas in the greater Boston area that live in quote unquote food deserts, or the Food Project, which is an educational farm that helps sort of students who might be at risk get farming experience and also sort of create life plans around food sustainability, and ways to maybe strengthen those partnerships so that Harvard is also working beyond, and that this organization, or that this position can be sustained by those partnerships. I also want to advocate for more equitable food-related legislation through things like politically active groups on campus. And then the last thing, the agriculture and food justice class, is something that we're now considering, given Harvard is expanding and has bought a bunch of land in Alston across the river from Cambridge, and is moving the School of Engineering there. But there's also potential chunk of land that might be used to expand the Harvard Community Garden, make it from a smaller garden to a larger plot where they could run experiments. And there have been sort of rumblings and workings of creating a class that uses the Harvard Community Garden Food Literacy Project as resources, but is also a freshman seminar where students can use that garden as a workspace and a learning space as well as the classroom. So we're working to, when the engineering school sort of finishes getting built, we're working to make that part of the expansion, make sustainability and food justice part of the educational aspects of Harvard's expansion into Alston. And yeah, I guess those are kind of everything.
Great, thanks everyone. So great, I'm glad to see people are warming up the chat board here with their questions. Thank you to all four panelists for those presentations. So one of the questions here is, has anyone had experience requiring incoming students to get an introduction to what happens on campus food systems and introductions to those folks? So it's, this perspective is that they found a decreasing distance between the provider and consumer when they increase interest and awareness, which makes sense. It is interesting, I'd be curious, and I'll point this to the panelists for anyone who wants to respond. And then other folks are certainly welcome to chime in. If you are an attendee, you're welcome to answer in the chat to other folks' questions there. And yeah, incoming students get lots of information about how campus works and how everything on campus works, including a bit about maybe the dining halls and times and cards and things like that. But is there anything built into orientation that involves a meet and greet or anything more in depth with the dining team and the food system that operates on campus? Do our speakers, Aaron, anything like that at USM?
Nothing like that necessarily at USM. Our orientation from the sustainability perspective is more generic. However, we do cover an ecological footprint, and we have students learn about what that means, and we compare their average ecological footprint to the size of campus, and that of course includes food production. So that's as close as we get to it, but we don't really talk about the actual food being served in the dining hall, our commitment to local percentage and that sort of thing.
How about anyone else? Megan, Jenny, or Abby?
We also don't have anything mandatory. What we do have that's sort of the closest thing is that as incoming freshmen, and especially the way that it works is that freshmen all live around Harvard Yard and then move into the houses that I was talking about earlier at their sophomore year. So once that process begins and students find what house they're moving into, a lot of house-wide events happen, and students go on tours often of the dining hall of their house, meet the dining hall managers, and meet the people that will be serving them food, but they don't actually learn that much information about, sustainability or any of that. It's more of a sort of social meet of the people you'll be seeing in the house. And then aside from that, there's beginning of freshman year, sort of quiz that students take to learn what to compost, trash, and recycle that is put on by the resource efficiency program in the sustainability office, but certainly nothing, and that's not mandatory either. Most people fill it out. I think that the rate is maybe like 70-80%, but nothing that's really directly related to food, not at Harvard.
Megan, do you have that? Did you have that coming in as a student at Unity, or maybe this is something that could be interesting to look at with folks who coordinate incoming orientation?
Yeah, we don't have a specific event necessarily. We do have a lot of outreach during Earth Week. That's our main deal. We brought on a few chefs this semester, and they had vegan and nut milks and whatnot, and that was our way of promoting food sustainability. But I do love the idea. It sounds like it'd be a great tool.
Great. And Jenny, does UVM do anything, or?
I'm not sure what they might do now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so heading back over to our chat with questions, folks who have any specific kind of, can you make the guess, a causation case for where specific student engagement or outreach strategies have led directly to an increase in local food is one of the things out there. And part of that too is another, there's a lot of questions baked in here, but so anyone can grab onto any piece of them that they would like, but also what are the trade-offs and some of the costs between promoting local food and the result that you get out of it, or what it takes logistically on the food service side of things. And yeah, any thoughts about, or any way that folks have been able to directly measure an outreach event or engagement activity to a direct increase in uptake? Any of the panelists want to jump on that?
Yeah, we haven't done that directly. It's tough to figure out a way to measure that sort of cause and effect. But we do informal surveys around the dining hall where Sodexo staff goes around and asks students a number of questions. And that's a way of getting sort of the raw information from them. And so if we don't ask the right question, we'll still get some good data that we can use. So they've been doing that, but it's hard to tie that directly to whether or not they're demanding more local food or taking more local food that's available.
Anyone else? We have lots more questions here. Since a lot of schools, not all students are living in a dorm or a residence that have a kitchen and access. And so thoughts about what schools can do to provide more opportunities for students to work hands-on. I think, Erin, you were actually one of the folks who led off saying, you know, if you can get your hands in the dirt, that really helps. But also we know if folks get excited about cooking and prep, and what are the ways to get them kind of doing that hands-on. I know that some folks responded in the survey that they do some trainings for students of all ages, and sometimes that's combined also with a culinary demo. Anyone have student culinary groups, or the occasional chance to put students, you know, behind in the kitchen, basically?
I can speak to that a little bit. So one thing we do here is we actually have internships for students to work in dining services and focus on local food and trying to help out the outreach on that component. So that's super hands-on. In terms of actual cooking and stuff like that, we have a food studies academic program here, and we've partnered with them. Our Office of Sustainability has partnered with them in the past to do something like a cooking event where we teach people how to cook with local food, where to find the local food, and how to choose healthy options, and at the same time how to find options that aren't going to break the bank, stuff that's very affordable. And so that's open to not only student, staff, and faculty, but also members of the community to come in and work on that project. So that's something that was done this past semester, and my staff was involved in carrying that out.
I can also speak to that a bit. We have at Harvard a course called Science and Cooking, which is like a very popular course because it sort of fulfills the physics and earth science gen ed requirement, but is a cooking class. So it has a combo of science and cooking. And they have their own laboratory on campus where there's kitchens, but it's also sort of a scientific lab. And when they're being used by the class, they are less flexible, but you can actually book the lab anytime you want to do some sort of demo. You just have to have either someone who is an administrator for the class be there, or someone with some other kind of like cooking license. Not a lot of students know about that, and I guess it takes sort of, because it's such a large lab, people don't often use it as just sort of a small for themselves kitchen, but FLP fellows use it a lot as a space that they can rent out to host events and demos. And if other organizations also wanted to host events and demos, it's certainly available. I don't know ways to sort of make that more known to people. But being able to use a sort of scientific lab space is definitely a way to make a kitchen happen. If you have kitchen tools, you could also just use any lab classroom and sort of have hot plates as stovetops that you bring in. So maybe for a school that didn't have a large industrial kitchen that they could use as a demo space, that would be another option. Yeah.
Great. Another question here is about making the connection with social justice issues on campus, along with local food access. And I had a thought about this myself, but I'm going to direct it to the panelists. And let's take that one, and then there's a second question here that I'll address afterwards. So first of all, combining social justice issues, engaging students with local food access. Any thoughts from the panelists?
I will speak to that as well. I guess, is this the question about how to get people who are not just environment or food interested already to be more involved?
I was going to wait on that one.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. The first part of it being combining social justice issues, so making this connection between social justice and local food.
I mean, the connection is often just there. It's not always like a particularly like difficult or hard sell, maybe in particular industries, but there's I guess a lot of disconnect between the fact that, food service workers are sort of disproportionately female, disproportionately undocumented people. They're disproportionately like older. They're disproportionately people who don't have degrees, who could work quote unquote better jobs. So that's an easy, like the food service industry and the people in food service, what they face. And then I guess farm workers is another aspect of that, that many farm workers, because farming as an industry is somewhat unregulated, it offers a great opportunity for people who don't have sort of the same status and access to be able to get a job and sustain themselves, but then it also offers much less protection. And then there's also that farm workers all around the world are sort of treated differently, and we source food from farms without really knowing what's going on those farms. So making that connection is just sort of like doing a little bit of research and being aware of those things, knowing, to what extent we can trust that things that aren't local, that we can sort of know them and regulate what's going on there. When things are local, if students have had the opportunity to visit a farm, know that it has particular practices, it's just sort of safer to be investing in monetarily, but also I think gives people peace of mind to know that like there doesn't have to be guilt associated with the food that they're eating. I don't know. Sorry, yeah, okay.
That's great. Yeah, I was also, things that came to mind too are, certainly there are organizations. I guess the one that came to mind for me was Nuestras Raíces in Holyoke, which in and of itself, or as an organization, is all about social justice, but they do a lot through food and farming and helping immigrants get into farming and access, and just thinking about different partnerships. I'm sure that there's many organizations similar to that, and having some engaging speakers, having field trips, having talking points about this intersect of environmental justice and social justice. I think there's a few different ways to take that on. But let's move on to this other question, which was, I think, really interesting. And I had made a note to myself while our speakers were talking about incentives that we use, and especially incentives that are maybe directed more at getting the folks who are not already interested in food. And I'd love to hear some thoughts about that, or strategies that other folks have for getting folks who might not kind of already be on the sustainability train or the food train involved. And I'm especially interested too in incentives besides free food. So any suggestions, thoughts? And if it's also okay to say, that's also been a challenge for us. If you don't have a solution, it's okay to say, yeah, that's been a challenge too. And maybe folks will have some thoughts in the chat board as well.
This is Jenny speaking. I noticed in the chat box, some people were kind of responding to that question about making events fun and to draw in people that aren't just there because they're already interested. And I totally agree. I think that's been pretty successful in the past at UVM, similar to some of the ideas that one of the attendees was listing was like an event called Battle of the Campus Chefs, where students partner to do kind of like an Iron Chef competition but featuring local ingredients. And that's really well attended and really popular by a lot of people on campus. And so that's just one example of how, a fun event can draw a lot of different people in. But also, like you said, Holly, I think that's also a struggle to get them to engage past the point of an event or a deeper engagement or a deeper knowledge of the issues. I think that's the challenging part. I think getting them to something is easier than getting them to stay or to come back or to engage further. So I think that's a real struggle.
Yeah, others? Megan, do you want to weigh in on this? Any thoughts from the student perspective?
Yeah, we've also been struggling trying to get that connect. We have a couple of classes that students can take we have like a global environmental history that discusses a lot of food related issues and whatnot. But other than that, we don't have too much here on the justice side or connection in that sense.
Well, I certainly appreciate Andrew Wilkinson's thoughts here. The blindfolded taste test of local foods is certainly interesting. I'm not sure what a local fish flash mob tasting. I don't know about the logistics. So Andrew, feel free to write into the chat board anywhere we might find out more information about what happens in a local fish flash mob tasting, or maybe there's a link to a video of one that you've been part of. Feel free to share more details. I definitely think I would be interested in some of those things, even if I didn't know more about them. So that's really great. And a swordfish toss, excellent. So lots of good ideas, fun ideas there for engaging students. I think I've always been a big fan personally of the experiential learning piece. So I agree, all of the things that folks have described that are hands-on, outside, active, kinetic learning, I think is great and really helps people to make a connection, because it's not just learning about it intellectually or seeing it, but it might be tasting it, touching it, feeling different things. And we know that makes it a deeper and sustained connection for student engagement. So to Jenny's point, being able to get beyond it just being, a moment in time to being something that really causes a change for that individual student. We're going to start wrapping up here because I know that there's a few more details that the FIND team would like to share with everyone. I just thought I would leave folks with a final question to maybe share in the chat board with one another. And that would be any specific examples of questions and things like that, or content that you've featured on monitors in your dining halls. Erin mentioned the napkin holder messaging that happens at USM. Just any kind of specific messaging or campaign that you've done that has seemed to resonate with students. If you'd like to share that in the chat board as we start to wrap things up, that would be great. Maybe it's an example of a question that really generated a lot of interesting response on one of your surveys. That would be interesting to share. I also want to acknowledge that there were a couple of questions in the Q&A, a little less directed towards specific student engagement, but around how folks treat foods that maybe once qualified for the Real Food Challenge, but no longer because maybe the company was bought. And also any policies, state or federal, that might make it easier to source local foods on campuses. So folks should also feel free to weigh in on the chat board for those two questions, which are a little not exactly about student engagement, but if you have a response for the folks who asked those questions, you could write those in the chat board as well. I will say my thank you to Fine and the speakers, and I think I'm going to pass it back to Mike to share a few more resources and how to stay in touch and in the conversation for the future.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Holly. And thank you to our four speakers today. You know, they gave some really great real life examples of how to engage students, you know, from community gardens to student events to volunteer days and things like that. So it was really great, you know, presentations and some really great discussion afterwards too. So thank you all for joining us and contributing in the chat box. You know, so like we said, you know, this we'll be capturing some of the information in the chat box, so please keep sharing it and can share it with everyone after the event. We'll also be sending a survey after the event for you all to provide us some quick feedback on what you thought of the forum and what other topics you might like to see at future forums from Fine. And so another thing that I'd like to let you know about is that if you would like to continue the conversation about student engagement, you can join our upcoming working group discussion, which is on June 12th, where we'll be discussing ways to start planning for student engagement next fall. And so how the working groups function is each month there will be a different call with a different working group from the Pharmacy to Campus Network. We have 4 working groups. One of them is focused on engagement and education. And so on June 12th at 2 p.m., we'll be having a call that you can join in and brainstorm with other people and continue this conversation around student engagement. And the last thing that I want to say is that our next forum will be in June, and it will be featuring speakers from UMass Amherst and Colby Sawyer College on the topic of tracking local food purchases. So that involves, you know, how do you measure your percent local, whether you're, you know, if it's 5%, 10%, things like that. So if you would like to join that forum, we welcome you to do that. And finally, if you would like to just get involved or learn more about the Pharmacy to Campus Network, you can contact us at campus@farmtoinstitution.org or find us on social media. And so thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful day. See you all later.